Welcome back to another session of 30 Questions. This is a book we're working off of by Timothy Tennant. We can get this book online if you want. You might want to go to seedbedministry.com, be the easiest way. The person who wrote this, Timothy C. Tennant, by the way, is also president of Asbury Theological Seminary. My wife and I met him a few years back. Very down-to-earth guy for being a doctorate and a seminary president. We're looking through the different questions that any Christian should be able to give an answer to. A sentence answer or two, maybe two sentences, not a whole paragraphs like we have here. This will just give you more information. We've already talked about God and what is the Trinity and how do we know about God. These last three sessions now go into more of the sacrificial system. Why did God call Abraham and enter a covenant with Israel? What was the purpose of the law? Were the last two sessions. And today, what's the purpose of the priesthood and the sacrificial system? Well, to begin with, there were 12 tribes in Israel, and God took one of those tribes and he said, I'm going to pull those people out. They're going to be my special possession. I claim them to be the ones who represent me to the rest of Israel, and my proxy then to the rest of the world. The purpose of the priests was to remind the people of the gravity of sin and the need for redemption. And they were given the power through God's instructions on how to make that happen. But even the priests failed. We all knew that. We're human. We all sin. So once a year in the Day of Atonement called Yom Kippur, the high priest would have to spend all night being purified himself. And he would go into the temple. He would offer sacrifices for himself, for the priests, and for the people. The idea was that they knew no matter how hard they tried, they would always be falling short. And every year he had to go back in to make those sacrifices for the entire thing. Along the way, there were sacrifices for people who made mistakes if they did it by accident. If you intentionally sin, God's not really offering you an out for that, but if you fall short and you goof up and you find out, there were also sacrifices of praise, of fellowship offerings, if you did something, a real blessing from God and you wanted to share. So there were burnt offerings, grain offerings, fellowship offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings. God's holiness demanded perfection. You can understand that concept. It's not like, well, he's really good, so try to be really good. God is perfect and he demands perfection. We have the sacrificial system because we fail over and over again. But that's the whole point. It was a temporary system. The whole idea of atonement, literally, as he says in this book here, means to cover up. It was a temporary covering of sins. It wasn't meant to be the final solution. Every year they had to repeat these sins over and over again until we have a high priest who came to us who offers that permanent salvation, which we know in Jesus Christ. So the human race was being prepared for that permanent high priest and that permanent sacrifice in the birth, the death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So in a very short form, what's the purpose of the priesthood and the sacrificial system? Is to prepare us the concept of the high priest and the sacrifice. So with that, we can get right to the scripture verses for today's Bible study. He starts off with Exodus 29, verses 1 to 9. Now, this gives you an idea of how detailed it was getting a high priest installed. This is what you are to do to consecrate them, so that they may serve me as priests, God said. Take a young bull and 2 rams without defect, and from the finest wheat flour make round loaves with yeast, thick loaves without yeast, and with olive oil mixed in, and thin loaves without yeast and brushed with olive oil. Put them in a basket and present them along with the bull and the 2 rams. Then bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting, wash them with water for purification. Take the garments and dress Aaron in the tunic, a special robe, the robe of the ephod, and the breastpiece. The breastpiece had 12 stones on it. Each stone represented a tribe of Israel, so he would carry them on his chest in front of God. The ephod carried the special Urim and Thummim, which were the ways that God would answer them in special questions. So the significance there. Fasten the ephod to him by its skillfully woven waistband. put the turban on his head, and attached the sacred emblem to the turban. We understood that sacred turban meant representing the people of Israel, so he was bringing them before God every time he came before them. Take the anointing oil and anoint him by pouring it on his head. Bring his sons and dress them in tunics and fasten special caps on them. Then tie sashes on Aaron and his sons. The priesthood is theirs by a lasting ordinance. Then you shall ordain Aaron. This is how you shall ordain Aaron and his sons. That sets up a little of the ritual. Each one of those pieces had a great deal of symbolism to them. I'm not going to take the time in this study, but you understand this is something very serious, not to be entered into casually. When it comes to an example of the offerings, we go to Leviticus chapter 1, verses 1 to 17, and then jumping over to 5. So I'll just read these for you now and get a sense. It seems like a rather bloody thing, but this is their world. And it's important to remember that God speaks into the world we're living in. This would be totally inappropriate to do something like this today. But in their world, in their time, all around the known world, this is the kind of sacrifices they would have. The greatest difference is, instead of people trying to figure out how to please God, their gods, by doing these things, God said, "This is how you will serve me." So the Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you are to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and it will be acceptable to the Lord." Why a male? A male bull was worth many more times what a cow was. And without defect meant it was a prize. This was your prize herd stock. You're giving your very, very best to God. So you're to lay your hands on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. The symbolism here should cut you right to the heart. Here's this innocent bull, never did anything wrong. You're placing your hands on it, saying, I violated God's law, and by rights I should die, but you're dying in my place. You're a substitution for me. You are to slaughter the bull before the Lord. And then Aaron's sons and the priests will bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance of the tent of meeting. You are to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priest, are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Then Aaron's sons and priests shall arrange the pieces, including the head and the fat. Fat was considered a luxury. That was also part of the best going to God. Put it on the wood that is burning on the altar. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. They understood God was not eating the meat. He did not need these sacrificials to live. This was a sign. This was a gesture showing us a pleasing aroma. Now, as this goes on, we continue going through verse 17. I'm going to skip some of this because basically this first part was for a bull. The understanding was a merciful God. What if you can't afford a bull? All right, so if the burnt offering is from the flock, either a sheep or a goat, again, a male without blemish, slaughter it. Very much the same principle there, but now you're doing with a goat or a sheep instead. Then going down to verse 14, it says, if the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, offer a dove or a young pigeon. Then it has a prescription for how the priest would go about this. The thing I'd like you to see about this is a merciful God didn't require one acceptable offering. You were supposed to bring a young bull. If you couldn't afford a young bull, you just don't have the means, you could bring a sheep or a goat. And if you were that poor, you couldn't afford a sheep or a goat, you could bring a pigeon or a dove. Honestly offering before God, it is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to God. Carries that symbolism up there. And the second one is Leviticus chapter 1. Oop, I skipped one. There we go. Leviticus 1. That was the burnt offering. I guess I am ready for a break. Chapter 5, verse 14. The guilt offering. The Lord said to Moses, when anyone is unfaithful to the Lord by sinning unintentionally, keyword, in regard to any of the holy things, they are to bring to the Lord a penalty of a ram from the flock, one without defect, and of the proper value in silver according to the sanctuary shekel. It is a guilt offering. It must make restitution. If you move on a little bit, it says, not only do you pay the additional penalty, you do that, but a fifth of the value in addition to that, and give it to the priest. The priest will make atonement. The ram, it's a guilt offering, will be forgiven. If someone does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though they didn't know it, they're still guilty and will be held responsible. And that's a common phrase today. It used to be effect that ignorance of the law is no excuse for the law. I'm not sure if that still holds today, but it was back then. God's laws are holy. If you violate them, you violated the law. Ignorance is not an excuse. When you find out about it, you need to make it right. So if they do this, they didn't know about it, they're guilty and they're still held responsible. They bring an offering of a ram from the flock without defect of the proper value, make atonement for that. For chapter 6, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, if anyone sins and is unfaithful to the Lord by deceiving a neighbor, or something entrusted to him, or left in his care, or something is stolen, and they cheat their neighbor, they find it lost, they lie about it. When they realize their guilt, they must return what was stolen, taken by whatever reasons, whatever was, they must make restitution a fifth of its value. So not only do you return it, but you pay a penalty of a fifth on top of that. We talked about the 10 Commandments and how the first 4 talked about our relationship with God and how pure that has to be. And the last 6 all had to do with our relationship with each other. These are what these sacrificial systems are all about. If you violate the law and you hurt God, you need to make restitution. This last section, if you do the same thing to a neighbor, you have to make restitution. That's the penalty, bring to the priest. And that finishes verse 7. The next passage then we go to the New Testament. Here the author in Hebrews, we're really not sure who this author is. He's writing to the Jewish people. Try to understand this new system. For centuries they understood the legal system with priests and sacrificial system, and now we have Jesus Christ. And it's hard for a lot of the Jews then, and it's hard for people nowadays, to figure out exactly how does this work. So we're picking this up, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. He says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who hath ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. See, every high priest was selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters relating to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those that are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weaknesses. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sin, as well as for the sins of the people. We just read about that in the Old Testament. And no one takes this honor on himself. He receives it when he's called by God, just as Aaron was called. Verse 5, in the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest. God said to him, you are my son. Today I have become your father. God declared this. And he says in another place, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was a priest in the Old Testament who had no father, no mother. He was the king of Salem, which is the king of peace. He had no beginning and no end. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered and was made perfect. He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him and was designated by God to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. One last passage that Tennant calls us to is in Hebrews chapter 7, and this talks a little more about this Melchizedek concept. What was the purpose of the Levitical priest in the system? And how did Jesus solve this? If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law was given to the people established by that priesthood, why was there still a need for another priest to come? One in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron. For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe was ever served on the altar. For it is clear that our God descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. The Levites were the priests. Christ came from the family of the Judah. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears. One who has become a priest, not on the basis of a regulation as in our ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it's declared, you are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it is weak and useless. For the law never made anything perfect. And a better hope is introduced, by which we draw near to God. It's not without an oath. Others became priests without an oath, but he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has become a guarantor of a better covenant. Now, there have been many of those priests ever since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our needs. One who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart for sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day. First for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once and for all when he offered himself as the perfect sacrifice. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever. Now, the main point is that what we are saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. It gives you a glimpse as to the purpose of the priesthood and the sacrifices, preparing us. And all the way through the sacrifice, if you ever read the Old Testament and get into that, it's a little hard to read sometimes, but understand, God is a merciful God. He requires things be made right. But he also understands people don't always have the money. So he builds this into the system when he gives the Jews the proper way to worship him. Thank you for being with us. I hope this is helpful as we continue to move through the basic 30 questions. And again, if you have this book and you look at these 30 questions, understand no one is going to expect you to write paragraphs about this. You should have a working knowledge. So anytime someone asks you, you should be able to give a good representation of your faith, to be able to explain what it is you believe. I hope this is helpful, and I hope you come back again. God bless you. Bye-bye.